Okay, ready to deep dive into Adlerian psychology. This isn't your typical self-help stuff.
No, not at all.
This is about understanding why change is possible and how happiness, like, it's a choice.
It really is.
You can make it right now. We're talking like radical responsibility, challenging your assumptions about yourself, about the world, and like really getting real about relationships.
Yeah.
Because Adler thought that's where all our problems come from.
It's fascinating. You know, Adlerian psychology, it kind of flips the script.
Yes.
Instead of blaming your past, it's about, recognizing your power
Right.
to choose a different path, and you can start today.
Today,
That's
exactly.
good, like right now.
And we're looking at the book, The Courage to be Disliked,
Yeah.
which honestly makes all these ideas surprisingly engaging.
It's true.
It's like Socrates meets self-help.
It's funny you say that.
It's
It's true
different.
because the dialogue format is so effective, and I think it's because it reflects how we actually learn. It's this back and forth, this philosopher and then this young man who's like grappling with these ideas.
Totally.
It makes it really relatable.
Absolutely. And you know me,
Yeah,
I'm always up for a good story.
of course.
And so the book opens, it starts with this guy who is a total recluse, and your first thought might be like, ooh, trauma, like rough past.
Right.
But Adlerian psychology says, hold on, what if he's choosing to stay home? Like, what if it actually serves a purpose?
It's a hidden purpose, often.
A hidden purpose.
And that's where this idea of Adler's teleology comes in.
Okay.
This idea that challenges the traditional understanding of cause and effect
Right.
and suggests that we're actually driven by like our future goals,
Oh, yeah.
whether we are conscious of them or not.
So even staying home
Yeah.
could be someone's way of, like,
Yeah.
that's the best option for them to achieve a certain goal.
Absolutely. Or to avoid certain outcomes.
Right. Or avoid something that they don't want.
Exactly.
So it's not that our pasts are irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's just that they don't control us.
They don't have to.
So instead of saying, oh, I'm like this because of this thing that happened, it's more like, I'm behaving this way to achieve.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what is a recluse? What could they be trying to achieve that makes, like, isolation feel preferable? I'm curious.
It's a really good question, and I think, the book suggests that for some, being a recluse is a way to avoid potential pain of relationships. Maybe they have social anxiety, a fear of judgment, of being disliked.
Well, yeah.
And so they choose what they perceive as the safety of isolation over, the complexities and potential hurt of connection.
Right. I mean, that makes sense, but it's kind of a sad thought.
It is a little bit.
Like, you're missing out on, like, a whole part of life.
A fundamental part.
Yes.
Right.
But so then how does this idea of teleology
Right.
apply to, like, say, feelings of inferiority?
Yeah. Let me tell
Because
you,
I think we've all been there.
Adler believed that everyone experiences inferiority. It's normal, especially when you consider that we're all born helpless and dependent, right?
Right.
It's not the feeling that's the issue, it's how we use it.
Okay, now I'm really interested.
Think of it like this. You see someone achieve something that you admire, and you feel a pang of inferiority for it, right?
Yep.
Do you let it paralyze you?
Oh.
Or do you use it as motivation to learn, to grow, and maybe even strive for your own version of success?
It's like they say, comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
But like you're saying, it can also be a motivator
Yes.
if we don't get caught in that comparison trap.
Absolutely. And you know what's really interesting?
What?
The book links feelings of inferiority with bragging.
Hold on, how are those two connected?
I know, it seems counterintuitive.
Because bragging seems like the opposite of feeling inferior.
Exactly. But the book argues that bragging can actually be a way to mask those feelings of inferiority. Yeah, if someone constantly needs to tell you how great they are, it might be because deep down they're afraid you won't recognize their worth otherwise.
So someone who's like acting superior
Yeah.
might actually be deeply insecure.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility, and I think it shows just how complex human behavior can be.
Wow.
As Adler said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, no one can bear the inferiority complex for a long time, so one compensates in some other fashion and looks for an easier way out.
Right, so instead of like confronting those feelings of inferiority head on, we develop all these coping mechanisms to make ourselves feel better.
That's it, and that's where things can get, kind of messy in our relationship.
Right, because you're projecting. Right.
You're not just dealing with your own insecurities,
Yeah,
but
okay.
you're potentially projecting them onto others.
And that brings us back to like this idea that like one of Adlerian psychology's biggest like points is that we're all interconnected. Right.
Which is huge.
It's not me versus you. or this constant need to compete.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like we're all on the same playing field.
Right.
But we're running our own races.
I like that.
It's not about beating other people to the finish line.
Right.
It's about you taking your own next step.
See, this is starting to feel less like psychology and more like philosophy.
Right.
Which, you know me, I love a good philosophical debate.
Oh, of course.
But it's making me rethink this idea of competition.
Yeah.
Not just with others, but with ourselves too.
That's the beauty of Adlerian psychology. It makes you challenge all of your assumptions.
Right.
About yourself, your relationships, and the world around you.
Okay, so where do we go from here? Because that's a lot.
It is.
So if we're not supposed to be in constant competition,
right,
we're all striving for this belonging and contribution.
Yeah.
What's the roadmap? How do we get there?
Well, one of the most practical takeaways from The Courage to be Disliked is this concept of the separation of tasks.
Right.
And it's about understanding what is our responsibility and what belongs to other people.
So give me an example. How does that actually work in real life?
Okay, so the book uses this example of a child who refuses to study. And the parents are doing everything they can, right?
Right.
But whose task is it, really?
Well, I mean, the child's supposed to study, but isn't it ultimately the parents' responsibility, like their grades?
Adler would actually disagree.
He would?
He would say that the parents are too caught up in a task that they ultimately cannot control.
Okay.
They can create a supportive environment,
right,
but the choice to engage with the material lies with the child.
So it's like that saying, you can lead a horse to water.
Exactly.
You can try to make them learn, but you can't force it no matter how badly you want them to succeed.
And I think that applies to all relationships.
Interesting.
Not just parenting.
Oh, okay.
All relationships.
So are you saying that we should just stop caring about what other people do and just focus on ourselves?
Well, it's not about indifference. It's more about just recognizing that you can't control other people's thoughts, their feelings, their behaviors.
Right.
Those are their tasks to manage.
Okay.
You can offer your support, but you can't force someone to change no matter how much you may want to.
Yeah, I mean, I get it, but easier said than done.
Oh, for sure. Sure, it definitely is.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the courage in the book's title really comes in.
Okay.
It takes courage to let go of that control, to accept that you can't force someone to behave the way you want them to behave.
Right.
And it takes even more courage to be true to yourself.
Right.
Even if it means risking disapproval.
So how do we find that courage? Where do we even begin?
Well, that's where things get really interesting and maybe a little uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah.
The book argues that one of the biggest blocks to freedom and happiness is this: needing approval.
So you're saying that wanting to be liked is a bad thing?
Well, it's not inherently a bad thing.
Okay.
But when it's your primary motivator in life,
yeah,
it can keep you from being your true self.
Right.
And living in line with your values.
Okay.
Think about it like a politician who makes promises that they can't keep just to try and please everyone.
Right.
Do we do the same thing in our own lives, though?
Oh, interesting.
Do we bend over backwards for approval, even if it means compromising ourselves?
I see what you mean. It's like we're so afraid of being disliked that we end up living this lie.
Yeah.
Trying to be all things to all people.
Trying to please everybody.
Right. But is it even possible to be truly free of that?
That is the question, isn't it? I
Yeah.
mean, to live in the world
Right.
and just not care what other people think.
It's tough.
It's a tough one, and it's something, we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive.
We are.
This idea of what it really means to be free.
This is good stuff.
Yeah, it's juicy.
I like it.
It's good stuff. It doesn't mean you become someone who, doesn't care about anyone
Right.
or disregards social norms.
Yeah.
It's more nuanced than that. It's about recognizing that,
Yeah.
constantly chasing approval from everyone.
Yeah.
It's kind of a recipe for unhappiness.
It's exhausting.
It is.
It's exhausting.
And so it's about finding a different kind of freedom.
Okay, so if we're not chasing approval, then what's the driving force then?
Well, that's where Adler introduces this really powerful concept called community feeling.
Community.
Yeah. Have you heard of this?
I mean, I've heard of it in passing.
Okay,
I mean,
it rings a
it's-
bell. Basically, it's this idea that we find our true place in the world,
Okay.
not by conforming to please others,
Right.
but by contributing to something larger than ourselves.
Okay.
It's about belonging, but on your own terms.
So are you saying that true happiness is about altruism?
Kind of, yeah.
Should we all quit our jobs and go be philanthropists?
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be.
I mean, for most people, that's a big ask.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be about these like grand gestures or like radical life changes.
Right.
It's about like how can you find like everyday meaning
Okay.
in being of service in whatever way resonates with you.
So, like, what does that even look like?
I mean, it could be your family, it could be your community, it could be, you know, your work,
Right.
maybe a cause you're passionate about.
Right.
Maybe it's just like being present
Right.
and kind to like the person next to you in line at the grocery store.
What?
It's those small acts of connection and contribution, you know,
Okay.
that make up a life.
So how does that tie back into not needing approval then? I'm not.
Yeah,
It seems like they're kind of separate.
they are and they aren't.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
When your primary focus shifts from like
Yeah.
pleasing others
Yeah.
to making a positive impact,
Right.
you become like less preoccupied with what other people think of you.
Oh, I see.
You're not seeking their validation anymore.
You're finding fulfillment in the act itself.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's a subtle but like really profound shift in perspective
Interesting.
from do they like me
Right.
to how can I contribute?
Oh, I like that.
It's a big one.
Yeah, it's like shifting from like seeking external validation
Yes.
to like internal fulfillment.
Exactly.
I like that.
And the book really emphasizes this feeling of contribution.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be these like monumental achievements.
Right.
It can be, like I said, these small acts of kindness,
Right.
offering a genuine compliment,
Mm-hmm.
lending a helping hand, or just like really listening when someone's talking to you, right?
Yeah.
Without interrupting or, you know, offering advice.
Just being present.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's where it starts.
I like that because it makes like finding happiness, like real happiness, feel attainable,
Yes.
not so overwhelming.
The less overwhelmed.
It feels like something we can actually like
Yes.
build into our lives, you know?
Absolutely. And that's what I find so valuable about like Adlerian psychology in general.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about reaching some unattainable ideal.
Right.
It's about like, what are the conscious choices you can make in your everyday life
Right.
that are going to lead to like more genuine fulfillment and connection with yourself and others?
I like that. And, you know, one of those choices that we were talking about was this idea of separating tasks.
Yes.
But to be honest, I'm still kind of stuck on how that actually works practically, you know?
Yeah.
Because I feel like it could lead to isolation almost.
Yeah.
If you're always like drawing these rigid boundaries between yourself and others,
Right.
we're social creatures. I mean,
We are social creatures.
like, don't we need some level of like, I don't know, like intermingling of our tasks
Yeah.
to have like functioning relationships?
That's a really common concern. And I think it's important to remember that separating tasks
Mhm.
isn't about like building walls or
Excellent.
like becoming completely self-reliant.
Okay.
It's really just about clarifying responsibilities
Okay.
so we can show up for other people in a healthier, more authentic way.
Okay, give me a real world example.
Okay.
Give me a scenario where this actually like plays out
Okay.
in a way that makes sense.
Okay. So imagine you have a friend
Okay.
who is going through a tough time.
Right.
They're constantly complaining,
Right.
asking you for advice,
Yeah.
relying on you heavily for support. You want to be there for them, of course,
Of course.
but you're starting to feel like drained,
Yeah.
maybe even a little resentful, right?
Yeah.
It's impacting your well-being.
It's tough because it's like, where's that line between being a good friend
Right.
and then like you're completely swallowed by their problems, you know?
That's exactly where the separation of tasks comes in.
Okay.
You can acknowledge their pain, you can offer support,
Mhm.
but also recognize that like ultimately how they choose to deal with their situation
Yeah.
is their task, not yours.
Right.
You can be compassionate
Right.
without taking on the burden of fixing it for them.
So it's like, it's almost like holding space for them,
Yes.
but not letting their problems become your problems.
Yes. And by doing that,
Okay.
you're actually empowering them
Okay.
to take ownership of their choices
Okay.
and find their own solutions.
Okay.
You're not enabling them by trying to solve everything,
Right.
but you're also not abandoning them
Right. You're there.
by withdrawing your support, you know?
It's finding that balance.
It's finding that
offering a
balance.
hand up
Yes.
without getting pulled into the climb yourself.
Yes, I love that.
I like that.
That's a great way to put it.
It's subtle, but it's important.
It is subtle, but it's so important, and it's not always easy.
Right. It's not.
It takes courage
Yeah.
to set those boundaries, to sometimes say no,
Yeah.
even to the people that we care about the most.
But it's true.
But it's about, you know, preserving everyone's autonomy and capacity for growth.
And speaking of courage, we have to talk more about, what the book kind of highlights as like one of the biggest obstacles to freedom and happiness, which is this need for approval and like finding the courage to risk being disliked.
It's a tough one.
It is, especially I think in a world where we're constantly bombarded with these messages about like fitting in and being liked.
It's true. It's like, it is a challenge, and it really goes against, I think, our natural human inclination.
Totally.
To seek approval and avoid rejection.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah, and it's funny because, like, I get the being true to yourself.
Yeah.
And, like, not compromising your values to please others.
Right.
But it's like we are wired for connections. Like, we need to belong,
Absolutely. So how do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah, they seem like they're at odds.
It's a great point, and it gets to, like, the heart of what Adlerian psychology is all about.
Okay.
It's not about, like, rejecting social norms or becoming, like, this completely self-contained person.
Right.
It's about finding the courage.
Yeah.
To be your authentic self within your relationships.
Okay, I like that.
It's about connection.
Yeah.
Without having to, like, sacrifice who you are at your core.
Okay, so how do you actually do that?
How do you walk that line?
Yeah, how do you walk that line?
Well, the book uses this really powerful metaphor to illustrate this, and it's the story of Alexander the Great and the Gordian knot.
Oh, yeah. I've heard of this.
Okay, you know this one.
Vaguely.
Okay, refresh.
It's something about a knot that no one can untie.
Okay, so it was this incredibly complex knot that no one could untie, and there was this prophecy, right? That whoever could untie this knot would rule all of Asia.
Oh, wow.
So Alexander the Great, right?
Yeah.
Being the bold, decisive leader that he was, he took a very different approach. Instead of wasting time trying to, like, meticulously untangle this knot, he just sliced right through it with his sword.
He did. What a power move.
I know, right?
That's amazing. So how does this relate to Adlerian psychology?
So I think the Gordian knot represents these seemingly unsolvable problems in our lives, especially in our relationships. We can spend years trying to untangle them, right?
Whose fault is it?
Yeah, whose fault is it?
Yes.
What's the perfect solution that's going to make everyone happy?
Yeah.
Or we can take a more direct approach, like Alexander, and we can cut through the complexity.
So the sword, what's the sword in this metaphor?
The sword is the separation of tasks.
Ah, okay.
It's having the courage to say, like, this is my responsibility and that's yours.
Okay.
I can control how I respond, but I can't control how you react.
It's like this radical act of taking ownership.
Yes.
Instead of, like, trying to play the blame game or manipulate. You're like, this is my path.
Yeah.
This is my contribution.
It's powerful. Right?
Yeah. And everyone else has their own,
And that can be incredibly freeing, even if it means risking disapproval.
Yeah.
Because ultimately,
it's not about being liked.
It's about being true to yourself.
Right.
And living in alignment with your values.
And sometimes that means making choices that other people might not like.
Exactly.
Or agree with.
And that's okay.
And that's okay. And it's like, as we're talking, I'm thinking about this concept of freedom.
Yeah.
And it feels very central to Adlerian psychology,
It's huge.
It's not just about psychology. It's like a way of approaching life.
It's a way of being in the world.
Exactly.
And you're right. Freedom is a very central concept to Adler's thinking.
Yeah.
And it's something that, we're going to explore in a lot more detail in the final part of our deep dive. Because for Adler, true freedom isn't about, like, doing whatever you want, whenever you want.
Right.
It's about something much deeper than that.
Well,
it's about, having the courage to choose a life that is meaningful to you, even if it means risking being disliked.
All right, so we're back, and we're really digging into this whole idea of freedom.
Yes.
Which is a word that honestly means so many things to different people.
It does.
So
it's a big one.
Let's break it down, like, through the lens of Adlerian psychology.
Okay.
What does freedom actually look like?
So you're right, it's a loaded word, and I think
it is.
In this context, we have to remember it's not about, like, being rebellious, like free from responsibility or doing whatever you want with no consequences. Like, it's not about that.
It's not about that.
It's about something much more profound.
Okay.
Adlerian freedom is really about this, like freedom of choice.
Okay.
It's about unshackling ourselves from this need for constant approval and the weight of other people's expectations.
Ooh, I like that.
Right.
Unchecked.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like, it can feel so heavy.
It can.
All those expectations.
It feels so heavy.
So you're saying it's not about being like free from responsibility,
Right.
but being kind of like what we're talking about, like
Yes.
free to take responsibility
Yes.
for our own lives, our choices, our happiness. It sounds really empowering when you say it like that.
It is empowering.
Yeah.
Because it's recognizing that you have the agency to choose your own path, even if it's not what other people expect from you.
Right.
Or even if they don't understand it.
Right, and that's hard.
That's the courage piece.
That's just the courage.
That's where the courage comes in.
Okay, so I'm with you so far.
Okay.
But this is where I hit a snag.
Okay.
Because doesn't this sound a little chaotic?
Okay.
Like if everyone's just going around
Yeah.
doing whatever they want in the name of freedom,
Yeah.
wouldn't that just create a ton of conflict?
Sure.
Like, how does this work in a world where we're
Right.
constantly, like,
Yes.
interacting and relying on each other?
That's such an insightful question.
Yeah.
And I think it gets to the heart of why Adler puts so much emphasis on this idea of community feeling.
Right, right.
He understood that, like, true freedom,
Okay.
the kind that brings lasting fulfillment, isn't found in isolation.
Right.
It's about understanding that our actions have ripple effects.
Yeah.
It's about finding that sense of belonging and purpose within our relationships, not separate from them.
So it's not about, like, isolating yourself
Right.
in pursuit of your own personal freedom, but kind of finding that sweet spot where you can be your authentic self.
Yes.
While also being connected to something larger than yourself.
Yes. Yes. It's like this beautiful paradox.
It is kind of a paradox.
Right. But it's in that space, it's in that tension
Right.
where we find the most like authentic version of ourselves.
Okay.
The version that is free to make choices that are aligned with our values.
It reminds me of that quote, I think it was,
Yeah.
I think it's from the American Revolution, and I might be getting this wrong,
Okay.
but it's something like, freedom isn't free. You know, like you have to work for it, you have to earn it, you have to nurture it.
Yes.
But I think here, in this context, it's not about like fighting for freedom
Right.
in some like
Really?
external battle.
It's
Right?
an inside job.
Yeah, it's like cultivating this internal state of being.
Yes.
Where you can move through the world and you're contributing and you're connecting.
Yes.
And like through that, you become more fully yourself.
Beautifully said.
Oh, thanks.
I love that.
So, I mean, this whole idea of community feeling really resonates.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, I still struggle with like the practicalities
Yeah.
of it all, you know?
Totally.
How do you actually cultivate this? Because it feels very big picture.
Right.
It's very abstract.
So it starts with awareness, right?
Okay.
So we have to kind of shift out of this mindset of me versus you
Yes.
to this more interconnected us.
Right.
And just recognizing that even small acts of kindness,
Yeah.
genuine connection, can have these ripple effects.
Right? That makes sense.
Yeah.
But like, I think our listeners probably like, okay, but what does that actually look like?
Okay, so think about like the small interactions you have throughout your day, right?
Right.
Maybe it's offering a genuine compliment to a coworker.
Yeah.
Maybe it's holding the door open for a stranger.
Right.
Maybe it's just, like I said before, like really listening.
Yeah.
And I mean really listening.
Yeah.
When a loved one is talking to you, without interrupting them, without offering advice,
Without trying to fix it.
without trying to fix it.
Just being present.
Yes. These might seem like small things,
Right.
but they're acts of connection.
Right.
They're deposits in the bank of community feeling.
I like that. It's like, it's being present.
Yes.
Being mindful.
Yes.
Recognizing that like, we're all in this human experience together.
We are all in this together.
And those small moments,
Yes.
those seemingly insignificant acts of kindness or
Yeah.
connection, they add up.
They do.
And it creates a different energy.
It do-
Not just for ourselves, but everyone that we encounter.
100%. And that's what's
Yeah.
so, encouraging, I think, about Adlerian psychology.
Yeah.
It's not about, trying to achieve some far off utopia
Right.
or waiting for someone else to fix things.
Right. Right.
It's like, what are these small conscious choices
Right.
that you're making every single day
Right.
to create a better experience for yourself and for everyone around you?
It makes it feel manageable.
Yes.
It's hopeful.
I
Hope,
love
like,
that.
yes, the world is,
It's a lot
it
sometimes.
can be a lot, but
Yeah.
we actually have more power than we think
We do?
to kind of like shift the energy,
Yes.
create positive change
Absolutely.
just by how we choose to.
Like how we choose to show up.
interact with each
Yeah,
other.
yes. That's what's so empowering about Adlerian psychology, right? It's not about, like I said before, some far-off utopia.
Right.
It's about these small, conscious choices that we're making every day to create a more meaningful, authentic, and ultimately joyful experience.
So, I mean, as we wrap up
Yeah.
this deep dive on Adlerian psychology,
Yeah.
what's it like if you had to pick one takeaway,
One takeaway.
one essential truth?
Okay.
What would it be?
I think the most important message and the one that underpins everything we've talked about today is this. Happiness is a choice.
Ooh, I like that.
It's not something that happens to you.
Okay.
It's something that you actively cultivate. It's about taking radical responsibility for your life, your choices, and finding that beautiful intersection between personal fulfillment
Yeah.
and contributing to something larger than yourself.
And having the courage to be your true self, even if it means that not everyone is going to agree with that.
That's right, because when you're living in alignment with your values,
Yeah.
when you're contributing your unique gifts and talents,
Right.
the opinions of others start to matter less.
Right. Your self-worth comes from within.
From within.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a powerful message to end on.
It is.
It really is just this reminder that we all have the power
We do.
to create a more
Yes.
meaningful
Authentic.
and ultimately more joyful life. And we can start today.
And it starts today.
It starts today with a choice.
With a choice. What choice are you going to make today?
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, it's all about the choices.
So this deep dive, it's really just scratched the surface.
Oh, yeah. Adlerian psychology, there's so much there.
So much.
So much to explore.
But hopefully we've given our listeners a lot to think about.
A lot to chew on.
And just that reminder that the power to change,
Yes.
to choose happiness, to find freedom and responsibility, it lies within you.
It all comes back to you.
It does. That's a good way to end it.
That's it. That's it.
All right. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's your body.